Lone Survivor is a pixel art survival horror game that follows an unnamed protagonist as they attempt to survive a post-apocalyptic hellscape. Atmosphere. There's an overwhelming sense of decay and loneliness. The corridors are darkened and destroyed, and your flashlight only illuminates a small spot on the screen. But there's an almost dreamlike quality to the game. Pixelated scratches appear over sections where the corridors seem to stretch on forever, and you have to wonder how much of what you're looking at is actually happening. With the main character seemingly struggling with hallucinations during the waking world and strange, bizarre nightmares, the line between reality and dream blurs significantly. Strange and impossible characters emerge and say confounding things before disappearing, and the environment seemingly changes around you. Sometimes the protagonist says weird and eerie things, and if you leave your flashlight on before going to bed, he states, "No need for light in your dreams," before the screen fades to black, which always caught me off guard. The 2D layout of the game can be confusing, and I found myself constantly checking the map because I always kind of felt lost. The static you hear on the radio that signifies monsters can put you on edge immediately, and sneaking past them can be nerve-wrackingly tense. Lone Survivor is a weird, surreal, but deeply atmospheric jumbled mess, but it's clearly meant to be. That's one Harry Mason. Scares. The game's enemies aren't usually frightening or intimidating, and the pixel art nature of the game renders them as seemingly harmless, but this doesn't last long. Whilst they twitch around unnervingly, they just don't inflict a lot of fear until they spot you, frantically waving their arms as they rush towards you. But as the game goes on, they leap onto the ceiling or rip open their faces to spurt blood at you. And whilst this is unsettling, most of the fear comes from just how clunky the combat is. Whilst you can fire safely from a distance, you can only hit the torso, which costs more bullets. It's more effective to shoot them in the head, but you can only do that at close range, which puts you at risk. But the combat is meant to be a last resort, and you're supposed to sneak past them by leaning into the shadows and hugging the walls in specific locations to bypass them completely. This, as mentioned earlier, is nerve-wrackingly, as the enemies walk backwards and forwards at random, and if they surround you, you're done for. Whilst the game is called Lone Survivor and the survival elements initially seem harsh, there's an overwhelming number of things you can do to increase your supplies, like taking various pills you find in your apartment that lets you receive ammo or food from characters in your dreams to use in the waking world, or even the magically replenishing box in the supermarket, though I suspect overusing these things results in different endings. You can save the game in your bed and teleport back to your room via mirrors whenever you stumble across one, so it's pretty forgiving as long as you're careful. There's several scripted events and strange encounters, like the room that saps all your flashlight power that you can't escape from, which feels cruel, but it was a panic-inducing experience all the same. The boss encounters are a mixed bag, with the first one being pretty frustrating thanks to the confusing layout of the level, with it chasing you round and round until you find the right path out of the way, which can mean multiple deaths and several retries, and the second boss being more about straight-up combat ability and how many bullets you have. Lone Survivor isn't terribly scary, but it does have some decent moments. That's 2 Harry Masons. Sound design. The game's soundtrack is very overblown and loud, with gruff, menacing synths and distorted, dark ambient pieces that come across as haunting, but also a bit disparative. On rare occasions, it throws in offbeat, jazzy tracks when the game wants to signify that something isn't happening or it's messing with you. Overall, the soundtrack is emotive and really works with the game. There's a ton of incidental pieces that you become familiar with, like the mysterious chimes that play when you go to sleep, and I loved that the heartbeat slowly grows in volume in the background as you prolong your pressing X to wake up. The sound effects are all bit crushed and compressed and sound really great, with every gunshot sounding like the roar of an animal, and the enemy's howls so distorted and digitized that it's almost disturbing. The rest of the sound effects are vaguely similar to games like Silent Hill and Manhunt, with synth stabs passing for menu interactions, and I'd like that too. There's directional audio for which side of the screen the enemies are on when the radio distortion picks them up, and that's all you really need in a 2D game. Overall, the sound design is really great. That's 3 Harry Masons. Gore. There's a lot of gory things like cutting through a flesh wall with scissors and a pulsating masses of organic material laying around in corridors. The bosses are giant, hulking, mutated monstrosities that either shamble around or charge at you. I find the lack of clarity thanks to the pixel art makes some things more disturbing somehow. That's 4 Harry Masons. Story. An unnamed survivor wakens in his apartment after sleeping for an indeterminate amount of time, and realizing he can't survive forever in there, decides to leave to find help. As the game progresses, you meet a lot of characters, and it's unclear how many of them really exist and what's a hallucination, with some of them breaking down the fourth wall and most of the conversations that take place seemingly going nowhere. The main character has an obvious past for specific characters, and some conversations allude to relationships and friendships, though he himself can't put his finger on who they are. You feel a sense of mental decline as the game goes on, with him saying how he doesn't recognize himself in the mirrors, and it's a little sad when you get the feeling that he won't make it out of this situation with a sound mind. The ending was sort of abrupt to me, and I found myself looking at the credits when I was hoping for more answers. The story is pretty confusing, with the protagonist himself having no idea what's going on and various characters talking in riddles or being deliberately vague. It sparks intrigue, but it doesn't really ever provide you with many answers, making the final score 4 out of 5 Harry Masons. Whilst its survivor elements are a bit weak, thanks to all the help you can receive, Lone Survivor can still be a really atmospheric and frightening experience. Again, I'd like to remind you this whole thing is down to my opinion on horror games. If you don't share this opinion, then that's cool, I get it. I'd like to point out that whilst I ate a lot of unpleasant things, I did not scream like a banshee or run away from the computer, and I advise you don't either. There'll be more horror reviews in the pipeline, and thanks for watching. And always go check out Bumps in the middle of the night. Peace.